Hey, church family. I just want to say, first of all, just thank you for coming out on Sunday. A lot of you guys were able to come out, and it was blessed. It was a blessed time. I know I was personally encouraged by seeing so many faces and people that I haven't seen or been able to worship with in a long time. And I know not everybody was able to do that, and I understand. But just thank you. Thank you for coming out and being with us. And I think that God was glorified, and I hope and I pray that it was encouraging to you as well. On Sunday, I talked a little bit about Abraham. And Abraham is this great figure of faith and sees hopes against all hope. He hopes against in spite of the odds. And as I was thinking about that, I just want to expand on that just a little bit. I want to talk about him for a little bit longer this evening and just explore a little bit more about his story. Imagine for a minute that you read this headline. Or maybe you saw it on the news, and it says, force of 318 men defeats armies of 4 nations. I mean, think about that. What a headline. 318 men defeat 4 armies. What would come to your mind? Imagine how the different news channels would be trying to cover that kind of story. There'd be on-site reporters trying to get video footage of the men. People would want an exclusive interview with the leader of those 318 to find out his motivations for the attack and so forth. There'd probably be political leaders watching what happened. Some might be nervous, some might be excited. There'd be military analysts studying how such a small group of soldiers could defeat armies numbering in the thousands. Then give it a decade or so, and most likely this story would be given over to Hollywood, right? And Hollywood would make it into a multi-million-dollar movie. It's kind of surreal when you think about it. There's a surreal feel to that. But as unbelievable as it sounds, that's exactly what happens with Abram, who will later be known as Abraham. What he accomplished. And let's read that story together. That comes from Genesis chapter 14, starting in verse 11. It says, the 4 kings seized all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food. Then they went away. They also carried off Abram's nephew Lot and his possessions, since he was living in Sodom. One who had escaped came and reported this to Abram the Hebrew. Now Abram was living near the great trees of Mamre the Amorite, a brother of Eshcol and Aner, all of whom were allied with Abram. When Abram heard that his relative had been taken captive, he called out the 318 trained men born in his household and went in pursuit as far as Dan. During the night, Abram divided his men to attack them, and he routed them, pursuing them as far as Hobah, north of Damascus. He recovered all the goods and brought back his relative Lot and his possessions, together with the women and the other people. We read stories like this and we tend to move past them somewhat quickly because there's a little bit lack of detail. We like a little bit more detail, a little bit more action. But just pause and imagine it for a minute. Abram and his men defeated 4 kings and their armies in a rescue attempt for Lot and the rest of his family. Abram is powerful and wealthy. He has so much going for him that when you look at the life of Abram, you have different kings that honor him. And there's a priest of God that even comes to bless him. And what is unbelievable in this victory, as the backdrop, it seems odd that the Lord would urge Abram not to be afraid at the beginning of the next chapter. And that's what we see right in this context. In chapter 15, verse 1, it says, after this victory, after this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. Why would Abram, a great and successful warrior, not to mention a wealthy and wise man, experience fear in this setting? Generally, God commands people to not be afraid when they're already afraid. So he's not saying, don't be afraid, and you're not afraid. Okay, so good. He's telling them this because he's burdened. He's uncertain. And God tells, don't be afraid to people who are struggling. And so why does God say this to Abram? And the answer is in the context. Look in chapter 15, verses 1 through 4. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. But Abram said, O sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eleazar of Damascus? And Abram said, You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. Then the word of the Lord came to him. This man will not be your heir, but a son coming from your own body will be your heir. Abram was worried about his legacy. Abram was just concerned because he didn't have any children. And although God had promised Abram that he would have offspring as numerous as the dust on the earth, according to chapter 13, this aging man was still without an heir. Now, having just endured a life and death struggle in this battle, the fact that he remains childless weighed on his mind and on his heart more than ever before. Abram is holding on to the promises of God. Don't get us wrong, but seeing them played out was tough. There was so much that he just did not understand. And of course, God knew. God continues to know. But God knew Abram's heart and his thoughts. And so he addresses Abram's concerns by showing him the sky above, this vast expanse on a clear night. And this is what it says in verse 5. He took him outside and said, Look up at the heavens and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, So shall your offspring be. God renewed his promise to Abram again. And in that moment, when Abram simply reaffirmed his belief in God's promise, his belief was translated into righteousness in God's eyes. And that's exactly what it says in verse 6. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. This simple but strong belief in what God was really after, that's what he wanted. Abram's wealth and wisdom, his might, that didn't mean much in the context of God's greater plans for human history. But this simple believing, Abram opens up his life to God's control, which God perceived as a righteous act. And so Abram was this great man, but he was also only a man. Don't forget that. He was a man who had flaws, just like we do. He is found lying in a place, and he is trying to take matters into his own hands. And so even in spite of the flaws, and really no matter even the great things that Abram did, he has this battle that we just read about. And he is seen as this boldness pleading with God on behalf of other people. So Abram has these great feats. And so it's not about the great acts that he does, and neither really is it about the flaws. It really is about this simple act of faith, taking God at his word, that gave Abram the greatest reward any man could ever desire. He doesn't just get a legacy as in an heir. He has this legacy of faith that has inspired millions. And really, if you think about even billions of people throughout human history. And I think it's natural. It's natural that people want to somehow leave a mark on this world, don't we? We want to know that our lives were meaningful and that they have meant something to somebody. We want to be remembered in some ways, at least for a short time. I was thinking about this. I know that after I die, my grandkids, if I'm blessed to have any, will hopefully remember me and maybe even mention something to their kids about me. But I imagine that will be it. Eventually the stories will stop and memories of my life will fade away. But that's okay. It's not so much about those stories anyway. And what I can do, I can take heart that I can instill faith in the next generation. I can take courage that God is with me. I can know that what truly matters is a life of faith that I live out, which is far greater than any kind of wealth or power that I can accumulate on this world. Building a legacy that matters has nothing to do with the victories in battle. Rather, it has to do with a great faith that is lived out. I thought I'd end this video a little bit early by challenging you to do something on your own when I close this off, to do some reading and some thinking. And so I challenge you, when this is over, to read Romans chapter 4 and Hebrews chapter 11. So Romans 4, Hebrews 11, and both of those are about faith. And then after you read those, I want you to ask yourself some questions. What does it mean to believe in God? What does it mean to really have faith in God? And then the next thing, what impact should your belief have on the way you live? Looking at your life right now, maybe ask this question, this third question. What legacy are you leaving behind? Let's close with a prayer. Father, my prayer is that we will have a faith that takes you at your word, a faith that takes you at your word in spite of the impossible odds that seem out there, that we will know you, that we will trust you, that we will honor you. And Father, I also pray that in that, as we live out that faith, that we will be able to leave some kind of legacy behind, but not a legacy based on a worldly perspective, Father, but that we can leave a legacy of faith. So, Father, guide us in those ways. We love you, and we thank you for being with us. It's in Jesus' name, amen. And again, that is my prayer for you, that we will be people who learn to leave a legacy of faith. Blessings to you. Until next time.